I will. I want to make sure. Okay, good. Um, Morning, everyone. My name is Mike Webster. I'm now back at the World Bank, program manager for the 2030 Water Resources Group. But for the last 5 years, I was working for the city of Cape Town, for the municipality, as the executive director of water and sanitation. So when Julia, my former colleague, was coming, I looked at the program and said, but you don't have any presentation on the city. And if you're visiting Cape Town, you have to have some, albeit a little superficial understanding of the crisis we went through. And would there be interest in doing that? So this is not an attempt for, self-promotion or invading your conference, but it seemed very pertinent that a group of water professionals meeting in Cape Town about this would be interested in this topic. It's less academic maybe than some of your other papers. It's very much from a practitioner's point of view. This is working, heading up a utility in the hustle and bustle of local government. And for any of you who've worked in that environment, it's not a particularly thoughtful one. It's really very operational. And I think for those Cape Townians here or for those other South Africans, you would be very aware of the chaos that the pending day zero caused in the country and, even had ripple effects internationally. So I've titled it Lessons from Cape Town's Brush with Day Zero. And I've summarized them into 5 lessons, and each you could go into in depth. I will just touch on each of them, and then if there's questions, we can look in more substance at any of those topics. So the first is that this event really showed us that we are vulnerable to climate change related risks. And, until relatively recently, there was a lot of denial about that, or that was some abstract concept. In our case, we experienced a 1 in 600 year drought event that will come more often and had the scars to show for it. We survived the drought by dramatically reducing demand. And this was an all-of-city approach. This was a reduction in demand by over 50% in a city of 5 million people over 3 years. A very dramatic event, and I'll tell you a little bit how we did that. Lesson 3, and this is probably the most relevant to other cities that are equally water stressed and others that will become water stressed, is that you can't build your way out of a drought in the middle of a crisis. You can't build a desal plant or a reuse plant or tug an iceberg in, which was one of the recommendations, while your dams are, not producing water. And that's probably the most important lesson for other cities. The fourth, and this is sort of more forward-looking, we've managed to take some of the political and social capital from the drought and really try to create a water-resilient city. And by that, we mean keeping our demand low enough and building additional non-surface water supply. And we're in the process of doing that. And lastly, this cliche now, I suppose, but of not letting a good crisis go to waste, we're also trying to leverage the political capital from the drought to keep our tariffs where they need to be, to put in the right kind of reforms needed to create a world-class utility. Okay, these are the facts and figures of the city's Water and Sanitation Directorate. We serve a population of about 4.7 million, most through formal water and sewer connections, about 660,000 to residents and businesses. About 500,000 people are served with communal standpipes and communal toilets. We run the bulk water supply system, which is different to the other cities in the country that get from water boards, and have a joint regional system with 6 large dams. I think you visited the Berg River Dam in one of your visits in the past couple of days. We also run the sewage system. It's an extensive 9,000 kilometer sewer system, 23 wastewater treatment works, and the stormwater system. Okay, so lesson 1, Cape Town is vulnerable to climate-related shocks. This is the regional system called the Western Cape Water Supply System that provides water to the city. 95% of the city's water comes from this system. It comprises of 6 large dams, 3 of them owned by National Department of Water and Sanitation. 1 is the Berg River that you visited, and 3 are owned and managed by the city of Cape Town. This is the split between the city, which is almost 2/3 of the water, neighboring municipalities, and agriculture. Agriculture is relatively high-end agriculture, mainly fruit and grapes, and relatively efficient. Also accounting for about 100,000 jobs, and still the biggest economic sector for the province and for the city. This is the drought that caused all the upset. This is a rainfall over the past century. And as you can see, those in colors are previous droughts. The city, like most areas, are prone to droughts, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 3 years. A very significant drought in early 2000s, which I'll come back to. And then the rainfall between 2014 and 2018, which was regarded statistically as a 1 in 590 year event. 2 years after that, with higher than average rainfall, and then back down to actually the 6th lowest rainfall on record. This year does look like it's back though. So we weren't sure when we were looking at these predictions whether this was actually part of a 10-year drought period or something longer, or indeed it was a 4-year or 5-year drought period.
Sorry, but this information is only
the 6, yeah, within the 6 catchments, yeah, which vary quite a bit.
Yeah.
So if you look at Theewaterskloof and Wemmershoek, you actually have massively different rainfall patterns, but this is an aggregate of those 6. Predictions going forward, based on the UCT Climate Advisory Group, we are predicting a 25% reduction in our average rainfall over the next decades by 2045, and that's what we're using for planning purposes. There is a tail of that data which could be far lower than far higher than 25%, but that's a relatively conservative figure that we're using. What is shown on the left and the right is predicted future rainfall based on past rainfall. But on the left, it assumes a gradual reduction in that aggregate on a particular average, like the brown line. On the right, that would be a step change in our rainfall patterns. And they have very different impacts on our water resource planning, on our future ability to meet our demand. And one of the key lessons that we keep reminding particularly our politicians about and our council that authorizes the budget is the lessons from Perth in Australia, which has very similar rainfall patterns to Cape Town. It's 2 degrees north of Cape Town in latitude, and it gets its rainfall from cold fronts reaching landfall from the south and the west over the ocean. And this is the dam inflows in Perth over the last 100 years. It was averaging, a certain amount until the 70s, and then has experienced the step change over the past 50 years. And today gets 15% of the aggregate that got in the 70s, an 85% reduction. If that had happened to Cape Town, that's a much more dire situation than we're currently planning on. But this is a very sobering comparator. So lesson 2, and that was probably the most exciting part of it. We survived the drought by dramatically reducing our demand. And I've put in there, it was a joint effort between the city and the users, because we've leveraged some of that for future reforms. On the left-hand side, you see the water demand over the last 50 years. This is in megaliters per day. So we increased on a very steady 4% rate from the 70s until the 2000s, based on regular population growth and economic growth. And then when we had that drought in the early 2000s, there was a need to conserve. And if you see at the top there, I've said the era until the 2000s was a build to supply. It was one dam after the next. The Berg River was the last in that. From 2000 to 2015, it was a significant attempt to conserve water through conventional water demand management, water conservation. And that succeeded in flattening that demand curve to about a 1% growth from 2020 to 2015. And then the big drought of 2015 came, and that level of water demand management just wasn't sufficient and wasn't going to avert a crisis. And so this massive demand reduction happened from around about 1,000 megaliters a day to under 600 megaliters a day, a 55% reduction over 3 years. This is, and we've framed that next era in our water management as a resilient, or trying to become water resilient. On a per capita basis, we were at around 300 liters per capita per day, similar to the rest of the country. Now we went right down to about 110 gross, and now we're up at about 150, 160. How was it reduced? Three main types of measures. The first was the more conventional water demand management, the physical measures, a lot of leak reduction, a lot of non-revenue water reduction. The most innovative was probably a very aggressive pressure management program. We ended up saving 70 megaliters a day from pressure reduction. It meant that pressures were very low, around about 1.5 bar in the lowest pressure zones, but a big impact on savings. The second was financial means, and that was really tariffing, punitive drought tariffs for higher end users, and overall significant increases in our tariffs. We do require that indigent customers below a certain income bracket and with a certain house cost get free supply, and that's 38% of the customers. But for everyone else, significant tariffs that brought down demand. And the last is a communication campaign led by the mayor, driven by the city, the day zero work, a lot of stakeholder engagement, and an engagement with all different consumer groups, with industry, with ratepayers association, etc. This is just an example of the tariffs. 6 different tariffs bands as you go up in consumption. If you look at 2018, going from one restriction level to the next, it ended up consuming over 35,000 liters per month. That 1 cubic meter, 1 kiloliter would cost you about 1,000 rand, which is in the order of $60, $70 per cubic meter. So very, very significant tariffs. Now we've experienced a demand bounce back. This was this major reduction until 2018. The dams refilled. There's not as much a need to be that aggressive on our demand management, and the demand has bounced back to some kind of ecologically sustainable level with it. There's a lot more communication around our dam levels. I think one of the lessons from the drought was owning the situation. There's a water dashboard which comes out weekly. It's actually the most popular website on the city's website. It gives you current demand. You know, that 914 was from 2 days ago, megaliters a day. It gives you our dam levels, and it shows you, based on that graph on the right, where we are in terms of our need to conserve, and divided into early warning droughts, more sustained drought warning, and then an extreme situation where there would be much higher levels of restrictions and much higher tariffs. Lesson 3, 5 minutes. You can't build your way out of a drought. I'll go quickly through this. This is our dam levels over the last 20 years. We use about 20 or 30% over the seasons, so winter rainfall. The point I made earlier about not being able to build a desal plant in time really speaks to this graph. If we're going to have non-surface water supply, that needs to be done well ahead of time. If you looked at the relative contribution in the drought, the supply side, which was done through springs and through temporary desal plants and through temporary reuse plants, was insignificant compared to the demand management measures that were achieved. The strategy now is to move away from surface water sources and to diversify into at least 25% of groundwater desal and reuse away from this over-reliance on surface water. And in time, we think that mix will go even further. There's a lot of work in the regional system, in this Western Cape water supply system, to better manage between agriculture and domestic users. Alien invasive species clearance. There's the Greater Cape Town Water Fund, a very innovative fund with some private sector money and some charitable money that the city is also putting in to sustain. Okay, so we're using the demand to create a water resilient city. This was the strategy that we published in 2020, approved by the council. It's based on 5 commitments around inclusion, around improving our services to informal settlements, around water resilience, this wise water use, building an additional 300 megalitres a day of non-surface water sources by 2030, improving our regional supply, and then the last element is on the sustainability water quality element. Also a lot of work in sewage and wastewater treatment and what we call transition to a water sensitive city. This is the plans for the 300 megalitres a day of additional supply. Most of those projects are underway. A lot of groundwater exploration, about 100 megalitres a day. A reuse plant that's going to be up to 100 megalitres a day, and a desal plant that's going to be a further third of that 300 megalitres. These are the projects. I won't go into it, but different costings, different operating costs. We haven't, there was a temptation to say your future is going to be desal, and desal is infinitely scalable. Don't worry about all of the other potential sources. We've said, no, we want to diversify now because in time we will need that diversification in Cape Town's future. Reuse is a big part of it. We did a demonstration plant of 10 megalitres a day, and there's a Fora new water scheme which is under procurement, which will be injecting water into the network from 2028. When built, it will be the biggest single direct potable reuse scheme in the world. Lastly, I'll rush on these. We're using this to do a number of other reforms in the municipality, and I think it's not the focus of this forum, but just for your interest. We created a new directorate with a much more utility focus, focusing on revenue, focusing on customer orientation, and it's been quite successful in achieving a lot of those results. A significant decrease in customer complaints, which made a big difference to my life. This is, network issues, leading and meters, water management devices, informal settlements, water quality. Big reduction in sewer spills. We still have a major problem in sewer spills, about 300 a day from foreign objects in the sewers. A lot of it's around behavior. This is a whole nother topic in and of itself, but a major reduction of sewer spills. This is probably the biggest focus on the revenue side. We established a new customer services branch that was much more aggressive on the debt management and on the metering and on the customer relations. And that did result in a significant increase in our collection rate from the 80s until about 95%. And that's managed to justify a big increase in our capital budget. It's actually a fourfold increase in the capital budget from last year until the medium-term expenditure framework in 3 years' time. This was our singular achievement of our management team. We set ourselves the sight of joining this group, the leading utilities of the world, which until then, the dots were all outside of Africa and outside of the developing world. And we were accepted into that group, which is a merit-based organization in May this year. And this is a photo of the mayor and the team with the Golden Tap Award. So thank you very much. Sorry to go over the time.
Thank you, Mike. It's fantastic to hear what you guys did and what you accomplished. Question, in terms of the institutional arrangements, was most of the information provided to the decision makers to see what actions to take, what steps to take to minimize the impact? Were there a lot of consultants involved? I'm just trying to see, was it mostly the expertise and the technical abilities within the government agencies? How did that work to make it all flow together?
So I came at the end of the real heat. I started in July 2018. That real drama was earlier than that, but I was living in Cape Town at the time and have a sense of it. I think for someone like Kirsty or others in the room, you can also provide some insight into it. It was a very chaotic environment, and I think together with service delivery concern, there was also a political chaos, and the mayor was being ousted, and there was a lot of political drama, and at a critical point, the mayor also lost confidence in the department to be able to get, or to be able to articulate a message to get out of the crisis. And that was a major issue because they actually removed the authority for managing the crisis from the department and gave it to someone within the mayor's kind of inner circle to manage. And it went back, fortunately, after some time. But I'm not. Your question is quite a complex one with when you come down to the issues. But a key part of driving the reform and getting out of it was getting the narrative right and accepting the politicians' need to say this was a crisis. The day zero messaging wasn't supported by the department. There was actually a political messaging, and the department was saying, actually, this is a water resource issue that's going to resolve in time, but it was necessary to mobilize the necessary support. So to come to the question, I think the engineering side of the department was unquestionable, and there was a lot of very sophisticated engineers, but the ability to communicate and the ability to get the confidence of the politicians and of the public, and the ability to put together an easy to understand strategy wasn't really there. And that did come through some external expertise and through consultants and through collaboration. And it was partly forced on the department and partly, came out of choice.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I just have a couple of questions. So first one, we show us a very nice graph with figures of water demand at the beginning. And I'm just curious because you show figures only till 2020. So it was like we could see the increase in the water demand there. That basically is because probably the COVID crisis, the lockdown, and these kind of things. But I'm curious about the next years.
This is current.
That's current. And
Yeah.
compare with the I mean, the question is the levels of water consumption reduced in general, or they come back to the former?
It's not quite at where it was.
Yeah.
So it went up to 1,200 megaliters a day.
Yeah.
At the end of that sort of 4% growth.
Mhm.
Now it's at 914, I think.
All
was,
right.
2 days ago.
Mhm.
So it's coming up. We've, as part of the strategy, said that our optimal is 170 liters per day, per capita per day or less.
Right.
So we've actually named that as a number, although that the system may not be able to support that, at all times.
Okay. I also wonder if the pricing system in the 6 steps is still enforced, and if you have assessed the distributional or welfare effects of that pricing scheme. Thank you.
So the pricing is linked to this. The bands are very small that you can't see it, but there are 4 different colors in there. If you in the blue, no problem, although we call it water-wise, so you're still wanting to have some conservation. Your tariffs are as per the normal tariffs in council-approved tariffs. If you move from the blue into the yellow, you get a first level of restriction. That level of restriction goes with certain advisory notices. You can't water your garden 7 times a week, blah, 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 and certain tariffs. If you go from the yellow into the orange, another set of restrictions, another set of tariffs. And the same with it. So each of those restriction levels is linked to a change in tariffs. And those change in tariffs will be around, this is dramatic, this was in the middle of it. So at the moment, we're in a water-wise state. So there's no drought tariffs imposed. Yeah. Now, you asked about the distributional impact. So that's also another whole topic in and of itself. And there's been a lot written about it and a lot analyzed about it. Let me just say a couple of things. I think the first is that indigent customers get free water. So as far as the poor go, there is a national policy which we implement of requiring 10,500 liters per household, and that accounts for about 38% of our customers. The real distributional issue is just above that indigent line. Are the bills that those customers paying affordable? And there's a lot of cross subsidy. So, businesses are cross subsidizing and higher income users are subsidizing. But we have done quite a lot of assessment on just above that indigent level. Is that less than 4% of household income or some metric of affordability? And in simple terms, let's say yes. But I know I think there's an economist there and many others. This is a bigger topic.
Okay. Thank you for the really interesting presentation. I'm curious for the strategies that you mentioned to significantly reduce water demand during the kind of day zero conditions. Do you have a sense of which strategy was most effective in reducing demand and kind of how you're carrying those lessons forward into the future as you think about, similar conditions and, if those strategies are still being kind of included in your, plans moving forward?
So I think the 2 main are the economic ones and the engineering ones, if you like. The tariffs, I think, are the most effective, and they are being carried forward. And they are the one problem during the drought is that it was very difficult to predict, and so everything kind of unfolded in real time and added to the sense of chaos. One of the reasons that this has been a very important development is that this is now published on the website. As a municipality where we are and whether there's likely to be restrictions imposed, and it's based on science. Linked to that is tariffs as well, and those have been effective at influencing demand. But the engineering ones were equally important. The one that was most controversial was a meter that actually shut off after a certain consumption in the day, or the water management device, with an acronym of WDM, unfortunately, WMD. And they were rolled out en masse. We put in 500,000 water management devices for every, high-end, low-end customer. And they were extremely effective at bringing down demand. But because of batteries and technologies and a bunch of, they were a huge cause of unhappiness. And whether we need to do that again, I'm not sure. I think water management devices have their role, but not at that level of rollout. The pressure management was also important. You know, at the peak, it saved 70 megaliters a day, which is a 10% of the total. But it's not a, you know, you have a shower with a little trickle, and it's not a desirable service. But I think that combination of engineering and financial tools are needed for a crisis and are needed to keep the demand where it needs to be.
John, you say that 500,000 people in this city are living in informal settlements, and also you have a goal for inclusion, you know, in the strategy. What programs or actions are you doing in terms to resolve the access to water for these settlements? And what projections do you have in terms of they are going to grow more for migration or something like that?
Yeah, I think that's probably one area we have not had the level of success that we had the ambition to deliver on. Starting with the end of the question, those informal settlements are growing, and they grew rapidly under COVID. And as a country, we haven't solved how best to service them. 20 years ago, the solution was really seen to be in housing and moving those informal settlements into state-built housing. And then it's, you know, over the last 10 years, it's become very clear that that's never going to be able to be done at scale. And many of the people living in informal settlements don't qualify for a state house, and so you don't solve the problem. So they're going to be there, and they need to be better served. We have put in a lot more money into improving the level of service, both on the water side, but even more on the sanitation. There's a lot of unhappiness about sanitation in informal settlements. For many of the settlements, we've gone from a 1 in 5 communal toilet to a 1 in 1. So I had portable flush toilets, which are actually available on a 1-to-1 basis for a household. But it's been a problematic area. You know, the strategy was to engage much more with NGOs and to, do services much closer to a community-based approach. It's happened, but at a small scale. So I don't have anything particularly useful to say in that area, but to say that it's still a major concern. We are working with the Gates Foundation. We're doing a lot of things. There's a lot of things I can show you on paper, but it hasn't really improved the lives in any significant way at scale within the city. Kirsty's nodding her head at least. Do you have something to add?
Yes, thank you very much for this nice presentation. I have maybe a couple of questions. The first one, could you just give us an idea about the yield of water distribution network before and during the crisis? And then are the water distribution network and the sewer network or system managed by the same company? Were there any option to use desalination during the crisis? And my last question is related to, I don't know, I just would like to have an information about the cost of the produced cubic meter from the groundwater, the cost of cubic meter produced from the surface water, and if there is any detail related to the cost of produced cubic meter from desalination. Thank you.
The water produced before was up to 1,000 megaliters a day, or 1,200 megaliters a day, and in the middle of the crisis was down to 550. The municipality manages both the water and the sewer system, the network, as well as the treatment plants, pump stations, and the stormwater system. And then the costing. So these costs have changed a bit, but so this is a feel for it. There's a the unit capital cost is there in rands, about 19 rand a US dollar, I think, and the operating costs, they have been updated to an extent, but in round numbers, if you looked at the all-in cost for our current bulk water supply, it's about 5 rand a cubic meter from the 6 dams. The groundwater has been very varied. We thought this was going to be a cheap source of supply, but actually of the 3 aquifers, one is very polluted, and that's coming in at about 15 rand a cubic meter. One has very deep boreholes, and that's around the same amount, and the third is a bit cheaper, but let's say 3 times the current cost. Diesel is at about 20 rand a cubic meter, so about 4 times the current cost. Our cheapest source of water by far is this invasive alien species clearance, which is catchment management work, which is removing pines and blue gums from our catchments. And that's at a fraction of our current 5 rand a cubic meter. I think it's estimated 1 to 2 rand a cubic meter. So about a third of our current supply. And so we're putting a lot of resources into that.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm just doing some time management here while you talk about managing water. So we're going to move to the last speaker, Christina Babic. Kindly accepted not to have the question.